Conquest, war, famine, death. What do you think of when you hear these evocative words? It might be that you think of 4 legendary horses and their infamous riders striding forth to bring ruin upon the world. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are the famous harbingers of doom from Christianity that remain well known today thanks to their various interpretations in modern culture. So, who are these apocalyptic horsemen and what do we know about them? Let's find out together right now. The first mention of figures similar to what we now know as the 4 horsemen actually comes in the Old Testament books of Zechariah and Ezekiel. In the latter book, the 4 riders are referred to as 4 disastrous acts of judgment and are said to represent sword, famine, wild beasts, and pestilence. Pretty close to the 4 symbols commonly referenced today. By far the best known origin for the 4 horsemen, however, is found in the New Testament, more specifically the book of Revelation written by John of Patmos. The chapter tells of a book or scroll in God's right hand that is sealed with 7 seals. The Lamb of God or Lion of Judah opens the first 4 of the 7 seals, which summons 4 beings that ride out on white, red, black, and pale horses. Apocalyptic Christianity sometimes interprets the 4 horsemen as a vision of harbingers of the Last Judgment, setting a divine end time upon the world, a theme that has been represented many times across a variety of media forms throughout modern day culture. Let's explore each of the horsemen in a little more detail. From the book of Revelation. I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say, in a voice like thunder, "Come and see." I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. Sometimes referred to as the White Rider, this horseman based on the above passage is most often said to represent conquest. It is the horseman with the most interpretations, however, and is often in more modern versions said to represent instead disease or pestilence. In fact, early Christian thinking from the 2nd century interpreted this horseman as Christ himself, with his white horse said to represent the successful spread of the gospel. This is supported by the mention of Christ mounted on a white horse in the later book Revelation 19, as well as other references portraying Christ as a conqueror. However, opposing interpretations argue that the first of the 4 horsemen is probably not the same horseman of Revelation 19. They are described in significantly different ways, and Christ's role as the Lamb who opens the 7 seals makes it unlikely that he would also be one of the forces released by the seals. It must also be noted that while the rider of the white horse wields a bow and wears a single crown, Christ rides forth with a sword. This white horseman has even been interpreted by some as the Antichrist, representing false prophets in general and a desire to conquer that is often associated with the Antichrist. When the Lamb opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, "Come and see." Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make men slay each other. To him was given a large sword. The feared rider of the red horse, the horseman of war. This figure is often depicted holding his great sword upwards, a symbol of readiness for battle, or perhaps a declaration of war. The colour of his horse is sometimes described as simply red, but often more specifically as fiery red, intimating the fires of hell, or perhaps the colour of the blood that will be spilled during war. Some believe that this horseman represents more specifically civil war, as opposed to the more general war of conquest of the White Rider. The symbolism of war, of course, has a strong link to the apocalyptic theme that is most commonly associated with the 4 horsemen. When the Lamb opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature say, "Come and see." I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's wages, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine." Riding a dark black horse, the third rider is said to represent famine. Often shown carrying a pair of balances or weighing scales, this horseman has a clear link to starvation by depicting the way bread would have been weighed during a famine, although some believe the scales instead represent the scales of justice. The reference to the specific cost of wheat and barley imply the prices are significantly higher than normal, meaning that many would struggle to feed their families, as wages earned per day will be enough only for the minimum food to survive for that same day and nothing more. Of the four horsemen, the black horse and its rider are the only ones whose appearance is accompanied by a vocalization. John hears a voice, unidentified but coming from among the four living creatures, that speaks of the prices of wheat and barley, also saying, "And do not damage the oil and the wine." This suggests that the black horse's famine is to drive up the price of grain but leave oil and wine supplies unaffected, though out of reach of the ordinary worker. One explanation for this is that grain crops would have been more naturally susceptible to famine years or locust plagues than olive trees and grapevines, which root more deeply. The statement might also suggest a continuing abundance of luxuries for the wealthy, while staples such as bread are scarce, though not totally depleted. Such selective scarcity may result from injustice and the deliberate production of luxury crops for the wealthy over grain, as would have happened during the time Revelation was written. Alternatively, the preservation of oil and wine could symbolize the preservation of the Christian faithful who use oil and wine in their sacraments. When the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come and see." I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. The fourth and final horseman is named Death, known as Thanatos. Of all the riders, he is the only one to whom the text itself explicitly gives a name. Unlike the other three, he is not described carrying a weapon or other object. Instead, he is followed by Hades, in this case referring to the land of the dead or hell, rather than the Greek god. However, illustrations commonly depict him carrying a scythe, like the Grim Reaper, a sword, or another implement. The colour of Death's horse is suggested to be either a green-yellow combination, or more commonly, as simply very pale. This could be taken to represent the sickly image of someone close to dying, or indeed of a corpse. The verse beginning, "They were given power over a fourth of the earth," is generally taken as referring to Death and Hades, although some commentators see it as applying to all four horsemen. It has been suggested that the order of the horsemen is deliberate and indicate the flow of the apocalypse. The desire for conquest is inevitably followed by war. War will always lead to the general population suffering, particularly from food shortages and therefore famine, and famine is naturally followed by death. The concepts, symbolism and imagery of the four horsemen of the apocalypse has been an ingrained part of many cultures for many centuries, with the figures being used to represent, explain or justify all sorts of ideas, from the fall of the Roman Empire to modern political ideologies. In popular culture, the figures are commonly used characters across TV shows, films, music and video games, many times altered significantly, whilst retaining the core recognisable traits of the original horseman. The four horsemen, therefore, are a fascinating example of centuries-old ideas permeating so deeply into modern cultural thinking. Conquest, war, famine, and death. The four horsemen of the apocalypse. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more great stories. Cheers.